Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Alien Earth Season 1 Episode 5. It's called In Space, No One... ... So spoilers for the episode as always, and as the title kind of implies, this one is set in space and it's a flashback episode to what happened on the ship with Morrow before... I mean, we got a little tease of it in episode 1, but most of what happened before the start of the show, before the ship crashed, like what actually went down on the ship and happened to everyone. And if you'll rewind back to the review of the first episodes, I said a couple things about the stuff we saw in that ship. One was that I mean, praise is maybe a strong word, but I did say at the time, I remember talking about how, okay, they established that there was an alien ship, like, Weyland-Yutani style ships collecting specimens, and we get that one scene with the crew sitting around, very much like the original movie, to establish that this was happening. But because it would mostly play out like Alien, we don't need to see it, right? We can just sort of show a tease of it, we can show a glimpse of it, and then get into what the show's doing that's new and fresh and different, and so on and so on. Now, obviously, I've got a lot of critiques about the show in general, which I didn't know about at the time yet, but that was something that I said back then. So the idea that we spend a whole episode going back and showing all of that anyway, naturally I'm going to be a bit negative about that. Because I think one of the few things that I actually said was good about that first episode is that I liked that it didn't feel the need to show all that stuff. And instead, we just do it later in the season. We just go back and do it now. So in a lot of ways, I think it was a waste of time. I don't really think there was that much in this that really needed to happen. I think there's a couple of key little details that it wanted to get across, but honestly, you could have done quick little flashbacks to just that moment. I'm thinking Morrow, which is a flashback in and of itself, but it's him thinking about saying goodbye to his daughter and establishing he has a family and he has people he cares about. Like, you could have done that at any time in the show without having to go through the ship thing. You could have just shown this scene where he's trying to say goodbye and saying it'll be in space, and you don't need any more context for it. You understand this is him before he goes on the mission. It's taken a long time, and his daughter will be grown up by the time he gets back, if she's even still alive, because it's such a long trip. You would get that on its own. The other thing I remember saying about those scenes, the later scene in the ship from episode 1, which was when he's in the mother computer room, and the woman who is Zaverne, that's her name, she's banging on the door because the xenomorph's coming after her and he won't let her in. That was the other big scene from the ship in episode 1. And I really, I thought the acting was bad in that scene from her specifically, right? I critiqued her banging on that door. She didn't have the panic and the fear that felt appropriate for a xenomorph, a killing alien that was hunting her down. It felt oddly lackluster, and it really stuck out to me as bad acting. And I kind of hand-waved it in that review because I was like, well, it's a bit part. She's only in a couple of scenes. Maybe they didn't get the best actor. Maybe it's the director's fault, of course. And Noah Hawley directed this episode, so any critiques I give at acting throughout this episode, I'm leveling them at him as much as I am any actors. Because the director's a big part of what makes the performances work. They have to be given the right directions for the scenes that they're in. Because I don't know if this woman is a bad actress in general, or if this is just the show and the direction she was given. But if you remember, I critiqued that performance, and I said it felt kind of just off. It didn't work in the context of the scene. And not only do we get a full episode of this character now, in a fairly prominent role, and I don't really think her performance is that good in the rest of this episode, we get to see almost the entirety of that moment play out again. We get to see her banging on the door, asking to be let in, her body language as she's kind of waiting there awkwardly, and it all just feels off, right? It's even worse the second time round because in my opinion of the show in general, my feelings in the show in general have plummeted so much since I was really hopeful getting into the first episode that it felt even worse now seeing it again, honestly. But her entire character bit, she's got the trope this episode of being the acting captain after the actual captain dies, which has already happened at the start of the story. So it's all really just her not really stepping up, and she's constantly in shell shock mode, and she's heartbroken because she was having an affair I say affair, you know, a romance with another crew member, and they're not supposed to do that. And it just felt like this just short-handed way to try and build some of these characters and give them just details that are supposed to flesh them out. And I think the big thing that stuck out to me about this episode, right, which I did not like, if that's not clear at this point, I did not like this episode. I thought it was a waste of time. There's a couple of little things that I like. The eyeball alien continues to be the crown jewel. Like, the one thing that's consistently interesting in this show is the eyeball alien. But the big thing, more than anything else, and there's other problems as well, but the big thing is just how much I dislike the characters, the character rating, and how little they gel. And I think, obviously, there's a hard task being compared to any of, like, the first two Alien movies, but specifically the first one in this case, because we're very much doing a Nostromo-type ship. I mean, this is more of a science vessel with, like, a research lab, but it's Weyland-Yutani, they're wearing those uniforms, they're definitely going for those vibes more than anything else. Which, you know, fine, right, whatever. But the problem I have is that these characters are insufferable. Most of them are either annoying or just so poorly developed that I just cannot get on board with any of their scenes. There's some of them who, like the young engineering apprentice, like they try and give a character trait of him not knowing what a lot of words mean. He doesn't know what biology means. He doesn't know what apprentice means, even though he is an apprentice. It's like just hitting you so over the head to try and sell a character in a really short span of time, and it feels so inelegant. If it's probably the biggest complaint I've had with the writing in this show, actually, is how clunky and inelegant it feels when it's trying to get points across to you, when it's trying to explain characters. So we can't just have something that subtly suggests that this acting captain, Zervani, cares about one of the guys that died, because the other guy that dies off camera at the start is the science officer, and that's who she was in a relationship with. We can't just subtly imply that. We have to have multiple characters bring it up, right? We have it brought up with someone who's in the third party who talks about it. We have the Morrow confront her and talk to her about it. We have him watching some of the security footage of them having sex. Like, you know, we really hit it home. We have her looking over him lying in the cryopod when he's got the face hugger on him, and she's pouring the dirt of his home state on top. I think that's what was happening anyway. And I don't give a shit for a start, but like it all feels so heavy-handed in trying to get the points across. And I think this is not a character thing I'm going to talk about, but I'm going to bring up an example of like where I think there's a clear, more elegant way of doing something, but they have to dumb it down and spell it out in dialogue when they didn't have to. And my example is this. In the science lab, there's a bunch of the specimens in these tanks and cages or whatever, right? And we have the science lady, right? Because there's like a doctor character, and then there's like a science lady who's still doing like tests and stuff. I assume she was like the second in command of the science bay, because the main science guy's dead. And she comes in with this younger character who is kind of working for Morrow throughout the episode. He's the one talking to him. He's one of these really quick talking characters who's never taken anything seriously, and that was also kind of like weirdly it almost felt like a really modern, like kind of whiny character from I don't know, just it felt out of, it's one of the sort of characters that just feels a little bit out of place in this universe, but that's maybe more of a personal nitpick than anything else. I'm just describing him so you know who I'm talking about. Right? So he comes into the science room with her. And because the episode starts with these two characters, the captain and this other guy, who have been killed off screen, or they've been face-hugged off screen, to be more precise. The captain is dead because the doctor tried to cut off the face-hugger and the acid blood melted through his neck, right? Which, I don't mind that happened. That's actually quite interesting to hear, what, you know, because obviously we keep teasing the idea of what happens if they try and cut a face-hugger. And because the doctor didn't know, the acid comes out and kills him, alright? That's kind of interesting. But because these facehuggers have come out, this younger character's a little bit scared, and they come into the science room and the lab, and he's like, immediately picks up a chair and starts like, oh, I'm just going to like scan the area, make sure nothing's out. And the science lady says, hey, don't worry, all of the lights are green. If one of the things were open or there was like a breach of some kind, that light would be red. One of these lights would have turned red for that tank, that cage, whatever you want to call it. And it felt so clunky. And even in the moment, as soon as she said this, as soon as we have this character act like really scared so that she has to explain this to him, even though he's been on this ship. I mean, I get that he's maybe not a science officer, so maybe he doesn't come in here as much, but it felt so clunky when all you have to do to tell the audience, because red and green lights is like one of the most basic visual, like, language things you can possibly have in a movie or a TV show. All you literally have to show is later on, when it becomes relevant, right? And she's putting a tank back in the thing, the eyeball alien's in the tank, and she's slotting it back into place, and the whole point of the scene later on is that she's not actually securely put it in. And the scene ends with the red light, the camera focuses on the grid of lights, and this one light is red, show where that eyeball alien is. All you have to do, and they even have the opportunity, is that she puts another tank back in place earlier on in the same scene. Literally, all you had to do is when she slots that first tank in earlier in the scene, you cut to that board of lights where there's one red and then it clicks to green, right? She slots it in, cut to panel of lights, red turns to green, and immediately, in a second, visually, the audience is completely aware that those lights are green when the tanks and stuff are locked in securely and there's no danger, right? Everything's A-okay. Green is good, red is bad. It's that simple, right? It's that simple. That one shot that they could have inserted would have told you everything you needed to know, instead of, admittedly, it's not that long. It's like 20 to 30 seconds of dialogue, but it felt so clunky in the moment, and it felt like, oh, there's so much more just simple, elegant ways of showing this without having characters to explain it. And then that's the other thing about having the young apprentice character for the engineering guy, right? You've got the Irish engineering guy and his apprentice, right? The apprentice is like, just casually asking questions because he's like, they basically made a dumb character who doesn't know anything so he could ask things for the audience, and it just feels so clunky. And these are just the sort of things that were constantly coming up throughout the episode where I was either annoyed at a performance, or the tone being off, or the characters over-explaining things, and ultimately, I don't really understand the point of this episode all that much. Like I say, a couple of little moments from Morrow's backstory, or the final scene where he goes to Yutani and gets permission to hunt down the creatures no matter what, which is, does take place after everything in this episode. It's after he's crashed on Earth. Like, those things could have been simple little quick flashbacks in another episode. This did not need to be a full, let's play out the entire story of everything getting out. Now, admittedly, I said there was one or two things that I did kind of like. That's the eyeball alien. Like, there's actually a really intriguing little moment here with the eyeball alien where it seems to try to warn the science lady, which is interesting. Not that I think the eyeball alien is like concerned about her safety per se. Maybe it's more like, oh, it knows that these other, tick-looking aliens that she's like studying in the other tank, they're dangerous, and because one of them's getting out and this eyeball alien's seeing it, he's like tapping on the glass, like, hey, science lady, look at this, like, be alert, there is danger afoot. I thought that was like intriguing. It was different. It was like, wait, what? It's showing concern. It definitely ties back into this idea that it's smart, that it's intelligent. So I thought, okay, that's actually an interesting little thing they've added into that particular creature. And, there's a little bit of tension afterwards because the tick things have spat into her water and there's little things swimming around in it. So you're waiting for her to take a swig, and it ends up being the apprentice guy who does, and he starts coughing up blood later, which just leads to the crew being dumb again. Look, this doctor has already killed the captain by trying to cut the facehugger off because he's just willing to jump in head first without any real attempt at like parsing out like the dangers of what's happening. And then later on, he sees these big tick things on this kid's like system that they've opened them up, and they see them crawling around sucking on stuff like his organs or whatever, and he's like, oh, I'm just going to try and pull it out with some tongs. He just goes for it. He doesn't even think about it. Morrow's like saying, hey, quarantine protocols, get them out of that room, we have to seal it off, this could be a contaminant. And of course, as soon as he actually tries to pry one off, it releases like spores or something into the air, and both him and Science Lady just die within seconds. The apprentice on the table's dead. Like, they lose 3 more people in the span of like 10 seconds because they're just gun-ho about blasting up. And this is supposed to be people on a science ship, a research ship, right? They're doing studies and stuff. It's one of the pitfalls, I think, of writing an Alien movie, because Prometheus and Alien Covenant are super guilty of this as well, is just the scientists being the dumbest of... And it's okay to have them make, like, a selfish choice or something. Like, one of the things about the original Alien, of course, is that there's a whole sequence early on where they're bringing, is it Kane, the first one who gets face-hugged, if I remember the names correctly? They're bringing him back to the ship, right? And Ripley's like, I'm not opening this door. That is a quarantine issue. Like, we can't let him in. That's just safety. That's standard protocol safety. And she argues her case. And in this scene, by the way, I watched this movie during the pandemic, and this scene hit differently during the pandemic, let me tell you. But she's like, no, I'm not letting him in. This is a quarantine issue. We can't let him in. He's contaminated. And Ash is the one who opens the door. Now, Ash, of course, later on turns out to be the one who's like, oh no, safety of this alien specimen at all costs. This is what the company secretly wants. So he breaks protocol for a reason. He's got a reason to break this rule. The others are being emotional, and they want to let him in so that they can try and save him. Ash is the one who knows that Ripley's right, but does it anyway. He overrides her and lets them in because he's got a nefarious purpose. There's a motive for ignoring the protocol. It's not because he's dumb. It actually enhances the character and his motives later on when you realize why he's been doing certain things, and certainly on a rewatch when you know why he's doing certain things. It holds up in a really cool way because it's like double justified almost. And you can have characters like do something willy-nilly because they're so emotionally invested in the person they're trying to save, and maybe they acknowledge they're breaking the rules, but they're taking the risk anyway. But the characters in this are like, the Doctor's already taken a risk that's killed someone else. He should be more like cautious. He should be feeling so bad about killing someone else because he acted not spontaneous, but like he acted without thought. He acted without care. He just jumped in head first because he was desperate to try and save someone. He didn't like stop to think like a scientist. But after he got someone killed by acting that way, you would think he would have a bit more pause. He would have a bit more, but the characters just aren't that deep. There's a couple of interrogation scenes with Morrow. Once Morrow realizes a saboteur, release some specimen and set some fire to the ship, which is why it's going to have to crash ultimately. Turns out to be one of the characters who's supposed to be asleep. Which takes some time to get to that realization, of course. Like, Morrow just finds the conversation in his chat logs with Cavalier. So Cavalier knew, like he basically, like, hired someone on the ship or manipulated them into doing this. And the guy even knows there's a good chance he won't survive crashing the ship, and Cavalier just kind of shrugs and says, well, that sucks if that happens, but I want my specimens. So... he's more nefarious now. I guess that's maybe something that would have had to have come up in some capacity, but again, I don't think it needed to be like this. I don't think we needed a whole flashback episode to the story of this ship to establish that Cavalier coerced someone or paid someone on the ship to sabotage it. I don't think that's, needs this whole episode to do that. We can literally just have that come up in some other way. But anywho, so... stuff plays out. Obviously, the xenomorph chest bursts out of the science, the deputy science officer, whoever he is, and there's a xenomorph roaming throughout the ship. Right, I get a little thing that kind of bugged me with this is that Morrow seems to already know how big a xenomorph gets, and it sort of raises this question that they already know so much about xenomorphs. Where I'm like, okay, I accept that in the original Alien, Weyland-Yutani already have some awareness of them, and that's why, like, as soon as, like, there's this signal from this planet, they, like, Ash's mission is hell-bent on getting these things back, because they want them, which would imply that they have some knowledge, or at least a vague idea that they exist. I don't think I like the idea, though, that they know so much, that they know the entire life cycle, that they know everything. And not even just by the time we get to the first Alien. They seem to already know it now. Morrow seems to already be so up in the whole thing. He's immediately calling them xenomorphs. He's like, oh, someone else is like, how big does this get? And he doesn't answer them, but he clearly knows. He clearly knows how big these things get. So the xenomorph's sort of in the background for a little bit. We don't see him for a chunk of the episode as they're dealing with the saboteur and they're dealing with the eyeball alien running around. And they're dealing with the kid being sick and everything else. It kind of, there's a couple of little bits that are they're smart enough in their construction, like when Morrow and the younger character are in a firefight with Saboteur in the hallway. He opens a door to get to cover, and that door's to the lab, which was earlier on sealed because that eyeball alien was loose, right? Acting captain lady and science lady. What was her name? Zavarni was acting captain. I never really learned the other character's name. They don't say a lot of the names so much. Oh, the young guy who was talking too much, that was Chlamydia. I remember that because they called him Chlamydia, which is not his actual name, it's more of a nickname, but obviously isn't like it very much. But I guess that was kind of memorable because it's a stupid name. But they go into there, so that's a good little payoff. Like, I'll give little bits of credit where I can. Like, they set up this room was sealed because we don't have time to deal with this specimen being on the loose. So we're just going to seal the room right now. We'll shut the door, but they don't tell any other characters about this, right? So the fact that these two characters are dead, right? Zavarni gets killed by the xenomorph. Or actually, sorry, she gets chased by the xenomorph. He doesn't get killed yet. The first guy that gets killed by the xenomorph is Tang, I think his name was. So I'd forgotten about this until they brought it up. But in the first episode, he was the one who was sitting all creepy, and they were accusing him of staring at one of the younger female crew members, and they were trying to tell him to cut it out. And I thought maybe he was an android, because it felt very like Ash when he goes a bit, kooky and alien. I don't think he actually is, though. And to be honest, there's not really much of a payoff to any of this. He stands over her cryopod and stares at her and gets like chewed out for it. He acts all weird and suspicious in the interrogation with Morrow, and like just is constantly like, I don't know, like really over the top, like kind of evil looking and corrupt, and clearly he's up to something, or isn't, as the case may be, because ultimately it's all just about making him unlikable, so that when he dies first, when the xenomorph kills him, I guess we're not supposed to feel that bad. But I felt like they put so much weird detail into his creepy behavior and how just maniacally he feels when he's around other people, where he's not really paying attention to them. He's clearly got his own motives, at least that's the way it feels. And then he just dies by the xenomorph. I don't know, like, unless somehow some more stuff comes out about him, it feels like a lot of time was spent on trying to flesh someone out, but it was so like cartoony in one note that it's hard to really take any of it seriously. I don't know, like subtlety is just kind of lost on a lot of the character writing in this show. I think that's maybe the biggest problem with them more than anything, is that their attempts to try and flesh them out seems to be to give them big swings, these big traits, and like these big character flaws that are so like in your face, but it just makes them feel really, I don't know, like I always say they're quite archetypes. Some of them maybe kind of slot into archetypes, but it's more just like the one big thing they give to them feels so two-dimensional that they feel more hollow than if they just didn't give them anything, if that makes sense. I don't know, like they feel so watered down to me. But yeah, the xenomorph attacks Zavarni and chases her throughout the ship. I will critique once again that like the xenomorph seems to really like having a face-off with certain people just so we can have like a spooky cinematic shot. I've been feeling it a lot in this show, where it just kind of like decides to have a face-off with a particular character so they can get the shot of the person looking at them or whatever. It is kind of in slow motion, which like helps make it less egregious, I guess, but it still feels a little bit weird. The chase itself's okay. I didn't really have too much of a problem with it. There's the classic kind of characters in the foreground hiding in front of a wall, xenomorphs creeping around in the background. I kind of like that part of it. That felt kind of cool to me. Some of the other stuff felt like it was like, hey, we've never seen a xenomorph just in full body shot standing next to someone in a fairly well lit hallway. That stuff felt a little bit weirder. There's a reason why they hid the xenomorph a lot, is because you maybe noticed some of the goofiness of the full body in like a well lit room. So, it's got a bit give and take on that. It kind of feels like, oh, we'll do some of these things because we've never seen a xenomorph quite like this, but we also may have never seen a xenomorph quite like that for good reason. So it's kind of, I'd call it kind of like I don't know, it works out just kind of even in the end, where I don't feel particularly positive or particularly negative. It's kind of like they try some things, I appreciate that. I don't think all of it works, but it's not like for lack of trying to do something else. The head's still too dry, but that's, I've talked about that before. So, the interesting part, though, is when we get kind of a face-off between the xenomorph and the alien eyeball. Because the alien eyeball gets its way into the engineer character. And so we actually see a human being taking over this eyeball. Doesn't really talk, at least not yet. Maybe we'll see that later when it takes over someone else. I was a little surprised to see it take over a human this quickly, but I guess that's the flashback kind of thing. There is a goofy moment here where the eyeball possessed engineer like takes a running jump at the xenomorph, and it's almost like a parkour move in slow motion, and that felt a little bit silly to me. It kind of felt like the absurdity of it was kind of on display. So maybe, again, sometimes just like it feels like restraint is just not being exercised here with anything. It feels like we'll just do anything we think of rather than think about will it look good in the end. But I did kind of like this idea of it wanting to fight the xenomorph, that this eyeball alien clearly is not a friend. It's clearly going to take over human beings and be evil in that sense, but it doesn't like the other alien creatures either and will try to fight them. And I do like the idea that the xenomorph kills the body, uses its mouth to stab the neck of the engineer, but the eyeball's still fine because that doesn't kill the eyeball parasite. It just sort of like slithers out and goes about its business, but it does kind of mean that there's maybe more of a showdown to happen later with the eyeball alien. So, very curious. You also see the eyeball alien try to like go into the xenomorph, I think. It jumps at its head, but obviously the xenomorph doesn't have any eyes, which maybe makes it the natural nemesis of the eyeball creature. Again, the eyeball creature is by far the most interesting thing in this show. And I think it's because it's just new ideas, and because it can't really be screwed up too much with bad character writing, because it's not a character, right? It's a creature. It's getting away with a lot of stuff that it wouldn't otherwise be working. But yeah, basically Morrow realizes that all hope is lost, goes to the mother room, and we get the scene from the first episode with the terrible acting of Zervani banging on the door, where it just does not click with what's actually happening at all. And the episode basically wraps up. Obviously there's some character details and stuff, but none of it really matters that much because they're all gone. Yeah, I felt like this 1-2 punch of an episode that we didn't need because it didn't really add that much. The few little things that it did add, other than maybe the eyeball alien stuff, which maybe could have been worked in somewhere else, is that it just, like, I said in episode 1, oh, it's good it skipped over all this. I actively said that in the review, only to get an episode later where it just did all of it anyway. So it feels like we didn't need it for that reason. It felt like it was more nostalgia bait because it wanted to do its version of Alien, right, in the show. But of course, Noah Hawley is not Ridley Scott. It like the pacing. This is the same problem I had with Halloween 2018. Actually, is I was excited for that movie to get a Halloween movie again, especially after those horrible Rob Zombie remakes. And I was very disappointed there were some story problems, but the biggest reason I didn't like it was because I felt that the way it was directed, the pacing of the scenes didn't feel like Halloween. Like the way Michael Myers moved around, the way those scenes played out did not feel like a Halloween kill scene. I'm kind of getting a lot of that from this show, but especially in this episode, because this one is the one that's the most like an Alien movie, the original Alien movie. Everything feels like it's rushing through certain beats, and because it has to do all these character things, it has to do the alien stuff with the xenomorph, but it also has to do these other creatures as well. It's on such a hyper drive, like where it doesn't have a lot of time to actually do things slowly or build the atmosphere that I want. It feels oddly devoid of atmosphere, and I think that's the biggest, because my favorite thing almost about the original Alien is how rich the atmosphere is. It's how oozing in atmosphere it is, and I feel no atmosphere. Like, they've got the doors, they've got the ship style from Alien, they've got the computer screens, and I appreciate that they have all that. I love that they have all that, but it doesn't actually accomplish the atmosphere on its own. The direction and the way they actually handle the scenes is a big part of that. And when you add into that I think the crew of characters are like, I don't really like a lot of the main characters on the show regularly either, to be fair, but like the characters on this ship, I almost universally disliked. Some more than others, but I didn't really like any of them. So this episode had very little to offer outside of the eyeball alien stuff, which I thought was neat. I think Morrow is a little bit one note, right? Obviously, they're trying to flesh him out a little bit by showing that he's got people that he cares about. But ultimately, he's just the hard ass who never seems to care about anyone. He only cares about the cargo, and that's fine. They've established that that's all that he cared about the cargo more than anything else. But maybe like a little moment where he seems to be a little sad that someone died, or just a little bit of humanity somewhere might go a bit of go a ways to say that, okay, well, he is quite ruthless. He's willing to do all these bad things, especially in the present day part of the show where he's like, threatening the family of the kid and all that. Give him a little bit of a layer, a second layer where he does, deep down, he does know what he's doing is bad, but he's got reasons to do it or something, right? Maybe he's doing this for his family because they're being taken care of by Weyland-Yutani because he's doing all this for them, or whatever the reason might be. Give us a little bit of depth beyond just stern face, I'm always about the mission no matter what. By this point in, if you're going to spend the whole episode doing a flashback to show what happened on the ship, maybe show a little bit of humanity in him as well. Would have been something, right? I'm finding him kind of one note at this point, which is a shame. That said, though, he's a better actor than a lot of the other actors in this episode. And certainly the character, at the very least, isn't annoying like the rest. I think he's one note, but he's not annoying like a lot of the other characters are in this episode. Ah, dear. Yeah, so, this episode sucks. And it's actually sad to see that it's got the highest rating in IMDb right now. And I feel like that's just a nostalgia bait. It's just people being like, oh, it's more like an Alien movie. Yeah, it's got the things that are in an Alien movie, but it doesn't have any of the pacing, the skill, the atmosphere, the ways that Alien builds tension. Like, the reason why Alien and Aliens is so good is not just because it's got cool ideas in it. It's because the execution is a big part of it. It's really high quality. And sadly, I feel that's lacking from here. I think Noah Hawley's writing is a complete dud for me in this show, sadly. And his directing is not exactly inspiring me much in this episode either. So, yep. We'll see what next week brings, everyone. But that is my thoughts on episode 5 of Alien Earth. Let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. Actually, this one's more of a nitpick. This is like stupid plot hole stuff, but this one bugged me. Is like in the backstory to the episode when the facehuggers got out, when we're watching the security footage, when Morrow's looking at it, our alarms immediately go off because of specimen breaches. However, when the eyeball alien breaks out of its tank, there's no alarm. And the alarm does go off, but not until two characters, the Science Lady and Zervani, come into the room, and it's after they notice that the thing's been broken where the alarm just starts playing. Because dramatically, it's a cool moment for it to start playing, but it makes no goddamn sense. Why wouldn't it start playing until then? That bugged me. Anyway, just consistency is all. Like, why would the alarm start playing halfway through them walking into the room instead of when the thing breaks out in the first place? I don't know. Very strange. And if your argument is that because the containment thing wasn't put back into its slot properly, okay, that makes sense why the alarm wouldn't start playing when it breaks out. But then why would it start playing when it does at all? I don't know. Like, none of it just doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, thank you for joining me. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and via YouTube membership. Check out MailFuzz Movies for all the movie podcasts and all that good stuff. But I will see you soon. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?